Welcome to the June 27th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Our chair, Roberta Fox, is excused today, so as vice chair, I will be chairing today's meeting. Before we begin, I want to make sure the public is aware we have a new parking validation system for the municipal parking deck. Please bring your ticket with you when you come inside the building, and there's an iPad tablet directly outside of these double doors to your left. I believe the validation is time-stamped, so right before you leave the building, make sure that you drop by the machine and scan your ticket so that you can exit the deck without paying. We have 2 items coming out of the committees this morning and 5 other discussion items today. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and public comments so that we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item not contained on today's agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to committee reports. There are 2 committee reports today, one from Strategic Planning and one from the Committee of the Whole. The first item out of Strategic Planning is Comprehensive Plan Amendment 1122, the Affordable Housing Location Policy Map. This is a city-initiated request to amend Map H2, Affordable Housing Location Policy Map, to update the map with using current data. This amendment is consistent with the policy guidance to update the map every 5 years with the most up-to-date information. This amendment merely refreshes the map with current data, and it does not change the map to alter current affordable housing location policy. The data is sourced from the U.S. Census, Raleigh Housing Authority, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and Raleigh Planning and Development. The Strategic Planning Committee discussed this item on June 8th. In the backup materials, you'll find a detailed memo, staff report, and presentation. The committee voted to report the item out with a recommendation for approval of this map. The committee also asked for the Planning Commission to request authorization from City Council to discuss the underlying policies used to generate the map H2. Commissioner Jennifer Lampman is one of our resident experts on affordable housing projects and serves as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. Committee Chair Lampman, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. We discussed, we had a member of the public show up and discuss the map in detail. It was a great presentation by the city, and we appreciated all the efforts that went into it. It is our general request from the Strategic Planning Committee to the Planning Commission, an opportunity for us to request from the council an opportunity to talk more about the policy that underlying the map.
I think that's great. Bring it back to the table. Are there any further discussions or comments on that recommendation?
I'll just say during our discussions, the major issue that we had with the policy while updating the map is completely appropriate and conforms to the policy. The policy that creates the map, the algorithm, we feel was a little coarse. And there's a HUD requirements about how you create these maps, and the policy, I think, meets those requirements, but it could do a better job of providing a more specific map. But there is a question, I think, about how big of a scale, big of an impact the program has, and if a course tool is still appropriate for staff to be using. Like if we put a lot of effort into this and got a much more specific map and neighborhood level instead of like a giant region level of opportunity areas, I'm not certain that would improve staff's ability to place affordable housing in appropriate areas, but I think it's appropriate to ask to look into it, and we can have that discussion about whether we want staff to spend that time or not.
Thank you. I would agree. Any other comments or discussions from the table? Then with that, I would like to entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion to adopt CP 1122 map to the apologies. It usually has to the comprehensive plan. Thank you. And with a request to discuss further at the Strategic Planning Committee.
So just to clarify, we have a motion to approve case CP 1122 and a request from council to authorize a discussion of the underlying policies used to generate the map. Is that correct?
Yep, and I'm happy to bifurcate that request if it's thought that it's better to do it that way. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. All those in favor, by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Moving on to our second committee report. Just a moment. The item C2, the Committee of the Whole. As Vice Chair of the Planning Commission, I serve as Chair of the Committee of the Whole, so I'll be providing this update. On June 22nd, the committee heard rezoning case Z6022. The current deadline for action is July 6th, and the applicant has requested to defer this case to a future meeting and request an extension from council in order to make that possible. I just wanted to confirm with staff, I know the number of days, I had it in two different ways in my notes, the number of days we requested. While you are looking that up, I wanted to add, the applicant stated that the reason for the deferral request is they would like to continue discussions with the neighbors and provide possible amendments to the case.
I believe the request was for an additional 90 days.
90 days, okay, thank you. I had it, two options. This is the second deferral request by the applicant. At the committee's first hearing on the case in March, the applicant likewise said that they wanted to defer the case to have additional time to discuss the concerns with the neighbors. As a result, we granted the deferral till June. At the June 22nd meeting, several neighbors attended and indicated that since the March meeting, the applicant has not yet had additional substantive conversations with the neighbors. The committee strongly agreed that if the second deferral is granted, we hope that the applicant will engage with the neighbors during that time. The committee unanimously voted to send this case to the full planning commission without any recommendation on the outcome and with a recommendation to request an additional 90 days from council. Is there any further discussion on this item from the table? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to make a motion to request from council an additional 90-day extension for case Z6022.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Then with that, by show of hands, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Okay, and then moving on to old business. There are 3 items listed under old business today. All 3 items have previously been discussed, so we have previously received presentations and heard from the public. For these items, we will begin with a short update from staff, focusing on the revisions to the request. The first item, D1, is rezoning case Z9022 at Rock Quarry Road and Diamond Drive. This case is to rezone approximately 1.88 acres from R4 to R10 conditional use. This item was previously heard at the February 28th meeting and deferred for additional conditions related to a community well located on an adjacent site. The applicant has provided new conditions on June 16th. On April 18th, council granted an 80-day extension, so the Planning Commission's deadline for action is now July 4th. This means that at our meeting today, we must either vote on the case or request additional time from council. With that, I will turn it over to Sarah Shaughnessy for a update to outline the revisions to the case.
Hi, good morning. Sarah Shaughnessy, Planning and Development. This is a request to rezone just under 2 acres on Rock Quarry Road and Diamond Drive. It's been a while since you've heard this case, so just a reminder of where it's located. And then I did want to call out the parcel that includes the well that's located directly south of the parcel assemblage there, and that's owned and operated by Aqua NC. So changes to the case since you last discussed. The applicant has submitted several new conditions. Number 1 and 2 are unchanged. Number 3, and then there's 3 through 6, there's one on the next slide, relate to well protections. So there is a prohibition on buildings within 60 feet of the well. The conditions offer cross access through the subject site to the well for the well owners. There's a prohibition on grading and regrading within 30 feet of the well. And then the last condition is that the developer shall construct a double silt fence along the limits of disturbance during construction. I'm happy to take any questions. I know the applicant is also here and has a presentation prepared.
Thank you. By show of hands, is anyone from the public here who would like to speak on this case? We have one, and the applicant has a presentation as well. Then with that, in order to reopen comment on this case, do we need to vote on that since it's previously been heard? We do?
Yes.
Is it without objection, or is it?
You can do it without objection.
Okay. Without objection, I'd like to provide an additional, it sounds like there's only one speaker on each side, an additional 6 minutes to each side to discuss this case. So first, we will turn it over to the applicant and those in favor.
Good morning, members of Planning Commission. Worth Mills, on behalf of the applicant, Peter Knassen, engineer for this project, is also available if you have any questions for him. Again, this is a request to rezone the assemblage from R4 to R10CU to allow for an additional 8 units. So during our interim between the last time that you heard this case and today, we did some digging into what regulations outside the UDO would apply for our building setbacks. We received confirmation from NCDEQ that there are no North Carolina Administrative Code policies that dictate how far this building is set back, nor did we find any private easements held by Aqua NC that would prohibit us from building within a certain distance of their well. And so the limiting factor today in terms of building setbacks is our R4 zoning. Under the conventional development option, we could build within 30 feet of the Aqua NC property. You can see the building setback area there in blue. Under the compact development option, the rear yard setback can be as close as 20 feet. So both of those options would provide for buildings that could be pretty close to the Aqua property and the well itself. The conditions that we have offered, again, include a 60-foot building setback from Aqua NC's community well, a 30-foot undisturbed area from that well, double silt fencing around that undisturbed area during construction, and an offer of vehicular cross-access to Aqua for well maintenance. The reason we offered the cross-access is because during a recent survey of our property, we found that Aqua's driveway encroaches about 10 feet into this site, and so we want to make sure that they maintain a safe and efficient means of access for that well. So the building setback, again, is 2 to 3 times further back than it is today. And again, that limit of disturbance or that undisturbed area is akin to the building setback under existing zoning. The zoning conditions would not place a structure any closer than already exists today on the properties to the south of the well. There are 2 accessory structures within 37 feet and 46 feet respectively. And there's also an existing single-family home approximately 93 feet away from the well. So there are existing structures within this 100-foot setback that Aqua NC requested. So just to summarize, the case is consistent with the comprehensive plan. These new zoning conditions provide setbacks that are far greater than what the UDO would otherwise require today. And again, this request is for an additional 8 units. Again, happy to answer any questions. Peter Knassen is here as well, and we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in support of this project? Then with that, we'll move it on to the opposition. Those opposed have a total of 6 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name's Oakley Dean Baldwin. I have lived at 6313 Diamond Drive, which my property backs up. I own 3 lots that back up behind this project. I have lived there for almost 40 years. And for 60 years, the county would not allow any building on these lots for various reasons. But I do appreciate the structure setback of 100 feet from the well house. That is a concern, but my major concern as a federal pollution investigator with the United States Coast Guard, I have investigated a lot of pollution cases. I retired as a Chief 1 officer. So the only drawing I have seen so far is where they're going to put their sediment pond that backs up to my personal property, 100 foot long by 25 feet, which is going to accept all of the petroleum, all of the oil transmission dripping from the parking lot, all of the shingle runoff from the roofs of these homes, and dump it into this pit that I don't know 5 years from now who's going to maintain this litter and rodents and mosquitoes and all this runoff that's dead center behind my property, right behind those, where you see that curvature up there at the corner of Rock Quarry and Pearl. It's almost like we're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole here. The other 60 homes in our this is not a separate plot of land. These lots that they have are part of Emerald Village. We have 60 existing homes on half-acre lots. They're ranch homes. So now putting 20 condos up there, no one in the neighborhood wants this. We're all seniors, and we're all getting old, and everybody's upset about it. We're not against construction. I mean, there's 88 units going across the street. There's thousands of units all up and down Rock Quarry Road being built. And the housing market has been slowing down for the past 13 months. So it's not like our pants are on fire to put these 24 units up here on the hill. I'm very concerned about contamination of this well with the only document that I have seen so far is this pit to catch the stormwater runoff. I don't want a WRAL situation with Mr. Norton or Horton that's running on TV cycles right now from runoff on new construction jobs. And this terrifies us. So we would ask this board and the stormwater department to take extra precautions for these lots and how this is built. You know, this property was just purchased a year ago to build these homes on. And it's not like this project's been ongoing for years and years and years. So we would ask from the neighborhood to take the extra precautions. You know, if it means who's going to do the, you know, are we talking about sampled well samples later on? Who's going to take care of the litter from this pit 5 years from now? You know, I'm living there. My grandkids live here. My children live here. You know, I walk my lots all the time. I mean, I want to have bees out there, but now I can't do that because I would be afraid to put my beehives out there. I've been studying bees for a year or two now. So, you know, we all have to give a little bit, and I get that. But let's don't put it on the back of the 60 people that live out in Wake County with no representation from the city, because we are not city of Raleigh residents. Only these lots that you'd be approving for these condos to be put on would be city of Raleigh residents. So I would ask you to please consider all safety measures. And I think I'm probably out of time. Thank you all so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Could we hear from staff with respect to the safety standards for the well? Maybe either directly from Ms. Shaughnessy or from Stormwater?
Yeah, I believe Sally Hoyt is here. I'm gonna, yeah, okay, great.
So well regulations, Sally Hoyt, Raleigh Stormwater. Well regulations are not directly a stormwater issue, but as a water resources person, I with Sarah have looked into the well regulations in North Carolina. If this were a new well, a 100-foot buffer would be required. But because it is an existing well, there is no requirement. So This well predates that 100-foot requirement. So if it were built today, it would have to, acquire land or something like that around it. Do you have any additional questions or?
So there is currently, for all new wells, there's a 100-foot buffer required, but for existing wells, there is no minimum setback required.
That's
It's
correct.
zero.
And we confirmed with NCDEQ that they would not even review this project.
Did they provide any insight as to the reasoning behind that policy?
My understanding is it's precautionary to prevent any infiltration near the well.
Okay. But could you confirm that under the existing entitlement today, the applicant could build up to traditional R4 with a 30 feet away from the well and with a compact development option within 20 feet of the well?
Yeah, that's correct.
So these conditions would actually increase the amount of setback versus the current entitlement?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, then, thank you for that clarification. Bringing it back to the table, I want to open it up to my fellow commissioners for additional comments and questions.
Thanks, Chair Miller. The letter from AquaZone, asked for a 100-foot. Did the applicant have discussions with them to determine how we got to the 60-foot buffer?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So after this case was deferred in late February, our primary goal up until this point, so let's call it 4 months, was to have a conversation with Aqua. We called, we emailed, we got no responses. We got sent to different people, and the most substantive thing that I saw was the letter that was addressed to you for the June 13th meeting. And had a brief conversation with the individual who signed that letter, but we never had any sort of conversation that would, help us better understand why 100 feet versus, 60 feet or 50 feet or whatever the, measurement may be. And just to look at what a 100-foot setback would look like, this is that building prohibition. We would also have, significant right-of-way dedication responsibilities along Rock Quarry Road. There's an overhead power line along Rock Quarry Road that we need to relocate as well. So you're essentially wiping out one of these parcels for development with a 100-foot buffer. And again, tried to reach out to Aqua to understand, if there was a way to reach a compromise, but we were unsuccessful in getting them to the table.
Thank you. I think this graphic is very informative. Even if they built a single-family house, it would not even meet the current adjacent property conditions. It would be pushed closer to the street. I do find it concerning that Aqua asked for 100 foot, but I just don't have enough information for them to identify what that would be needed for. And with the 60-foot request, I think that does extend beyond what's currently entitled. So I guess I would generally support this case, even with that letter from Aqua.
Thank you. Is there an additional comment? Oh, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I'm struggling a little bit with the request for 100 feet and knowing that if it were new today, it would require 100 feet. But I'm disappointed that Aqua didn't respond to your efforts to contact them to try to reach a compromise. And I acknowledge that, under current entitlement, it would be less than 100 feet. So my struggle is, if it were new, it would be 100 feet. There must be a reason for that 100-foot setback. We don't have 100 feet here because it's existing, but wouldn't whatever the concern is that would that is necessitating the 100 feet today, isn't that the same? I don't think the residents should suffer because Aqua didn't respond. So I guess I'm trying to balance a bunch of different things here. If it's 100 feet today, if it were a new well, there must be a reason for that, is what I'm saying, to prevent contamination of the well or something. I guess I just don't have the knowledge to understand why it would be 100 feet if it were a new well, but that's not grandfathered to the existing well. Is that well somehow more vulnerable to the concerns if it were a new well? That's what I'm struggling with. I don't have an issue with the request, and I appreciate that you've conditioned in a setback greater than what would be available under the current entitlement. I guess my struggle is with the fact that if it were new, it would be 100 feet. What's different about it being existing that 100 feet isn't grandfathered in, if that makes sense to others?
Thank you. Other comments from the commission? Commissioner McCrimmon, welcome to the Planning Commission. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you, and I do apologize for my tardiness. I was a little late from our previous meeting. But same to Commissioner Bennett's question, I understand we have a loophole that is allowing this to not follow the current regulations of 100 feet, because if this was a new well, that we will have to follow the 100 feet standard, but we also understand we have residents who live in this space that we need to also be good partners to. And so we have a loophole that we're kind of exploiting in this space. And I also understand the development in the business model that we need to also adhere to. But if we're thinking about this, just because Aqua did not do their part, how do we work through this piece and also make sure this project goes forward? We can't just, with a good conscience, and this is just myself speaking, and I'm just thinking about this as I'm listening to both sides of this discussion, think about this, and I just don't understand how we can, and I do apologize, this is my first meeting, and I'm just thinking out loud. I think we need to take some more time and really drill down on this a little bit more. Because 60 feet, which is agreeable, is a good compromise, but if this was a new well, you would have to adhere to the current regulations and standards. And that's 100 feet. And maybe that's more conversations with the current residents and answer a few more of those questions for them. I have a couple more questions myself, and I understand today is my first day. And so I don't want to throw a wrench into the process. I just got a couple more questions. I need some answers before I could properly,
Go ahead.
Really.
Sure. Do you have specific questions?
I do have specific questions. Why hasn't Aqua responded? Why hasn't Aqua been at the table and been good thought partners in this process? And it sounds like you have been a good partner. You came up with 60 feet, which I think that is very fair and reasonable in this process. So I do commend you. So I don't want you to think I am coming down at you on an unfair basis, but I understand also coming from state government, understanding DEQ regulations, if this was a brand new well, this wouldn't be a discussion. And so I need to understand where Aqua is in the process. So I think that's the biggest question there for me right now.
Okay. Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
Yes, thanks, Chair Miller. I too reached out to the Aqua folks and asked for some clarification on their request. They responded by sending me a reference to North Carolina Administrative Code 15A, 18C, anyway, public well water supplies, which I'm sure what Sally has gone through. And one thing I noted that the DEQ would grant variances from the minimum horizontal separation distances for new water supplies if it's impractical, considering the feasibility and cost for the public well system to comply with the minimum horizontal separation. In granting the variance will not result in an unreasonable risk to public health. And some of the other requirements include the well shall meet a minimum horizontal distance of 25 feet from a building. So it appears that even if it was new, that it'd be very likely that we would get a well with less than 100-foot minimum horizontal distance, given the variances available. I was also checking out the topography of this site, and I believe our public speaker, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name. I don't think you were concerned about the well in particular. I thought you were more concerned about the runoff and the retention pond. So I think that's worth considering as well. I've studied the topology of the site. Excuse me, the topography. I get my topo words confused. The topography. I was studying the topography of the site, and it appears to me that this site drains away from the well onto the subject properties. I don't think I'd be too concerned about runoff from the development encroaching onto the well, and I don't think that the DEQ would have a big problem with buildings within 60 feet. I'm happy to wait and answer more questions. I'm always happy to talk, but I'm ready to vote this out with approval.
Thank you. Commissioner Haber?
Thanks, Chair Miller. A couple clarifications. The staff report says it's currently can be built to 18 versus 24. To me, that's 6 units, not 8. The applicant said they were looking to gain 8 units.
That was a mistake on my part. It is a 6-unit increase.
So my understanding is by right, we can build 18 units within 30 feet of the well, or we can build 24 units within 60 feet of the well. So
Right.
by right, we can build 18 units within 30 feet. So, and I would assume that NC Aqua, to Mr. Baldwin's question, I don't know this is the case, but I would assume NC Aqua regularly tests their well if they're selling the water. So I would think that that would be covered by the owners of the well. So I'm inclined to support this case as well.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. So it's interesting they responded to you, but they wouldn't respond to the applicant.
I asked for a follow-up after this, and there was radio silence. So I got one response.
But thank you for that. Thank you for that information. That was helpful. Back to stormwater, and thank you for making the clarification that the residents are concerned about the runoff. Are there conditions that we could consider to address those concerns, the concerns about runoff? Or would that happen at some later stage in the site planning process? Or is there anything we can do here at this table to address the concerns of the residents?
In listening to Mr. Baldwin's concerns, I believe that those are mostly addressed under current regulations. So, for example, we have regulations about the maintenance of stormwater facilities. We require an annual inspection by a qualified professional to ensure that the maintenance is taking place, and those annual reports are submitted to the city, reviewed by staff. So there is a mechanism in place to ensure that maintenance occurs.
Okay.
Also, in terms of the flow would, my understanding is that Mr. Baldwin owns the 2 lots that you can see there on the screen. And so those do receive the flow from the sites that are the subject of this case. And so they would naturally, under current water law, receive the runoff from the site as well. But it would be mitigated in terms of quality and peak flow by our regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner McCrimmon?
Just one question, how often would that maintenance occur?
Per the state guidance, which is adopted by the city, there's a maintenance check required after each rainstorm over 1 inch of rain. And there's also actions that occur on a, biweekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, depending on the task.
So regular checkups. So this will be something that's occurring every year or every 2 years. This is something that's going to regularly happen, that they can actually go out, there's a problem, something can be
Yes.
done about. Okay.
Yes, and as part of the development process, for any, for a condo situation or any, where there's shared property, there's a recorded legal document that ensures that that maintenance occurs by the property owners association.
Thank you. Any other comments from the table? Commissioner Lampman.
This is a question for the applicant. Is it retention or detention? Is it subterranean or is it like an open pond? And then where were you planning on putting it? And then also, are these rental or single-family home ownership with an HOA?
So I believe these would be for sale products with a homeowners association. I mean, if they were for rent, they would still have the same maintenance responsibilities under the, property owner and the property management group tasked with maintaining all other common areas. The drawing that Mr. Baldwin referenced was for, what we envisioned to be the most likely location of a stormwater pond. Let's see if I can draw on here. And it's likely going to be in this area. We don't know the exact size. That was, again, just kind of a generalization based on the topography and where water's already flowing through that ditch across Diamond Drive and onto the city's Pearl Road, park property. But in terms of final design and, what that stormwater will look like, that's all going to be done at a subdivision and site permitting review. I do expect it to be, a stormwater pond. I don't expect us to have any sort of underground storage and treatment facility, so it would be, surface level. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Personally, I would agree with Commissioner O'Haver, given that the current entitlement would allow 18 units to be built within 30 feet of the well. I think that increasing it, this case is to increase the current entitlement to 24 units within 60 feet of the well, and I think that's a meaningful improvement, especially given the administrative code that would likely grant a variance in this case that would allow building within 25 feet of the well. So that's my current take on that, but I thank everyone for their comments and questions on this. Any other comments from the table? I would like to entertain a motion.
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated June 27, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment case Z9022. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Moving on to item D2, rezoning case Z823 at Ratchford Drive. This case is to change approximately 3.49 acres from industrial mixed use 3 with a special highway overlay district 2 to commercial mixed use 20 stories with conditional use. This item was discussed at the June 23rd meeting and deferred to allow the applicant to revise zoning conditions. I'd like to turn to staff, Hannah Reckow, for a brief update to outline the revisions to this case.
Good morning, Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. So as was mentioned, the zoning conditions for this case have been revised in 2 places, mainly Condition 2 regarding the amenity area. It's been revised that amenity area would be within 100 feet of the city greenway trail that's located in the right-of-way, Ratchford Drive right-of-way. And then a new condition that was discussed last time has been added, committing to a bidirectional separated bike lanes constructed in the frontage of this site's property, 2499, and the site to the north, 2501 Ratchford Drive frontage. So that's the update. Happy to answer any other questions you have.
Thank you. By show of hands, is anyone here from the public who would like to speak on this today? Or would the applicant like to provide an additional presentation? Okay. Well, in that case, I will bring it back to the table. Any additional comments or questions from the table?
I'll just say, I appreciate that the applicant was able to add the condition about the bike lane and working with the city and Mr. York in that regard. So I'm ready to make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated June 27th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement for zoning case Z823.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett has seconded. All those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passes 6-0. Or just to clarify, if someone is absent from the room, do they count as an affirmative vote? Or is the vote just 6-0? Not for rezonings. Not for rezonings. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to item D3, rezoning case Z1523 between South West Street and South Harrington Street. This case is to change approximately 0.45 acres from downtown mixed use 5 stories urban limited to downtown mixed use 12 stories urban limited with conditional use. This item was discussed on June 13th and deferred to allow the applicant to provide additional conditions that would address concerns regarding noise and traffic along Harrington Street and West Street. I will ask staff Alicia Thomas to update for an update to outline revisions to the case.
Good morning. Alicia Thomas, Planning and Development. Again, the case is Z1523. I'm going to jump straight into the summary of the revised conditions. There are a total of 10 conditions, and condition number 1 will remain the same, prohibiting various uses. Condition number 2 was added, specifically saying that the nightclub use would be prohibited, however, adding a definition of what nightclub was defined as. Condition number 3 was also was added to have restrictions related to eating establishments, regulating square footage and hours of operation. Conditions number 4 and 5 remained the same. Number 6 was modified, stating that there would be a 6-foot setback with any shared property line with the Fairweather property that's adjacent. Number 7 also remained the same. 7, 8, and 9. And number 10 was added, basically stating that dumpsters would be permanently located to the exterior of the building. Your deadline for action is August 12th. There were some outstanding conditions at the time of publication related to the conditions. Since then, staff has received signed conditions.
Thank you. We have already received a full presentation from the applicant and members of the public, but by show of hands, are there any members of the public here who would like to speak on this case? Seeing none, would the applicant like to provide an update on or a presentation on this case? So by show of hands. Then with that, seeing none, I will open it up to see if any commissioners have any questions or comment on this case. Seeing none? Oh, Commissioner Lampman, excuse me.
I just wanted to say that I appreciated all the engagement between the applicant and the residents on this, and felt like everything was addressed to my satisfaction. If anybody else has any comments, I'd love to roll into a motion.
No further comments? And with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Great. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated June 27, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and recommend approval of the zoning amendment. zoning case number Z1523. After consideration of the policies, maps, and other materials included in part of the comprehensive plan, the Planning Commission determines that the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans and consistent with the future land use map, and the request should be approved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Otwell has seconded. All those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passes 6-0.
It's actually 6-1, but she.
Oh, 6-1. Did I miss one?
Well, she's still not here. Did she leave?
I don't think so. Her computer's here. Would she be counted as a negative for not being in the room?
It's 6-1, but the explanation for the no vote is Commissioner stepped away without being excused.
I see. So it counts in the negative. That's correct? Okay. So 6-1, excuse me, for the last two cases. With that explanation, okay. Counted as opposed. Okay.
May I ask just a protocol question?
Yes.
Mr. York, in the case of a commissioner stepping away, what would protocol be if we have the opportunity, if this happens another time? Do we just let you know, and then are we recused from the vote, or how does that work?
Has to be excused from the table. To step out, take a call, do whatever, use facilities, whatever, just to step out of the room. Then your seat wouldn't, sorry. You can ask to be excused temporarily to step away from the table to where you're not able to participate. And then it's not a no vote. It would just be 6, in this case, 6-0, and a commissioner was excused temporarily from the table. But if you just step away, for most every other vote that is taken, if a member steps away from the table without being excused, they're an affirmative vote. 160A75 says, except for votes on development regulations. Okay? And so that's why I say not on rezonings. It doesn't really give good clarification on how you treat the person who was absent. And the way I've always thought it was best, since they're not a yes, they've not been recused or excused, then they have to be a no, but you can explain their no is because they stepped away, unexcused.
So there's no abstaining from a vote?
You cannot, you have to vote.
I see.
Okay.
Unless you're excused or recused.
Just curious, could we change our bylaws so that one can abstain if they are not in the room? Or that's set by statute, where you must vote? Yes or no?
It's by statute.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Then moving on to new business, there are two items on the new business agenda today. These requests have not appeared on previous Planning Commission agendas, so we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation.
I'm sorry. All these questions about being at the table distracted me. In the previous case, that's the 15 at Weston Harrington, there are in most of the language from condition 3 is repeated in a subsequent condition, and we would like the applicant to make that technical correction before it goes to council. And I just wanted to flag that for you all, that it doesn't change the merits of the case, but would change the details. I just wanted to advise you that we will be making that request to the applicant.
Thank you. So we do not need to make a friendly amendment to recommend technical changes. Thank you. Okay, then with that, learning a lot about procedure today. I like it. Item E3, Fairview Road and Bickett Boulevard. This case is to change approximately 1.01 acres from IX3 to NX4 Urban Limited Conditional Use. The deadline for action is August 26, 2023. I will turn to staff Hannah Reckow for a presentation.
Good morning. So this is case Z5021, as was mentioned, just over 1 acre, currently zoned IX3, requesting Annex 4 ULCU. This is located on an edge of a residential area, the 5 Points area, in a section that around Capitol Boulevard that has industrial and light industrial zoning. More zoomed out picture of where this is, so north of downtown, a number of industrial, commercial uses around Capitol Boulevard, and then a large residential area in the 5 Points and Hayes Barton neighborhoods, and then note here 5 Points, the commercial center there. Zooming into the site, it's a collection of properties, has the largest frontage on Bickett Boulevard and a shorter frontage on Fairview Road. This area here is Roanoke Park. And on the site currently are 1-story commercial uses, retail, and other kind of personal service. So this is a view from 2 views of the corner of Bickett and Fairview. And there are a number of zoning conditions proposed that restrict the building type and sort of the mixed sort of scenario of development, prohibit some land uses, commit to a bike share station, limit height along each of the frontages, so 2 stories at Fairview Road, 3 at Bickett Boulevard, and no more than 4 to the south. The site slopes down towards the south. And then also conditions regarding building materials, committing to mostly brick, a cap on commercial uses on the site, the number of residential dwelling units, committing to a certain amount of outdoor seating, hours of operation for commercial uses, site access for truck deliveries and truck and delivery traffic, hours of operation for outdoor amplified music that's associated with non-residential uses, commitment to installing a sound wall and a small building setback between the first and second stories, additional screening for on-site parking, limits for access between a residential and a non-residential parking deck, and then improvements to the intersection of Greenwood Street and Bickett Boulevard, where the lining up the residential parking access with an existing street, location of provision of a painted crosswalk, parallel parking, and a painted bike lane in the existing right-of-way. I'll mention that the applicant made some revisions to the language, the clarity of that language, and so that final language is on the table there. There's some minor changes there. So overall, what is changing here is going from a mixed-use district that has a restriction on ground-story residential and a height limit of 3 stories, removing that restriction, but there is a zoning condition capping the number of residential units and the commercial space. So an increase in potential housing units on the site and other commercial uses staying roughly the same. So this site does have a higher walk score, transit score, and bike score than the city as an average, and has good proximity to jobs, likely from the uses that are on the site today. There is bus service on Glenwood Avenue, which is within walking distance, and I'll just note that this is the site location. The request would increase the housing entitlement. It doesn't include any guaranteed subsidized units, but the variety of housing types that are permitted would permit a variety of housing types and allow smaller lots and units than on the citywide average and is within walking distance of transit. The census tract that this site falls into, area residents are less likely to be low income or be racial minorities compared to the citywide average, and the median rent has increased, but at a slower rate than the city average. So the future land use map designation is medium scale residential, which does envision a similar scale of housing that is proposed in this, but does not envision the same extent of commercial uses that are permitted in this district. So for that reason, it is inconsistent with the future land use map. And the site has a number of urban form designations. It would be within a transit station area for the northern PRT corridor, at least on the urban form map today, and is within a frequent transit area and a bus rapid transit area, so that urban limited frontage is consistent with those designations. And the request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. A number of policies relating to development around transit are relevant here. And then the limits on building height and the housing that would be permitted are contributing to these consistent policies. And then the inconsistent policy really is the future land use map designation. So your deadline for action is in the end of August. There are a few regularly scheduled meetings before then. My understanding is that the applicant is interested in making a revision to the frontage. You'll hear from him next. He can correct me if that's changed. There are a few other small corrections, technical corrections to the conditions that staff might be interested in as well. So with that, can answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Looking at this, I just want to clarify, sorry, I was distracted for a brief moment. These rezoning conditions that we have received, are these amendments to the rezoning conditions that are provided in the agenda?
Non-substantive changes to the language.
Okay, sorry about that. So they could still make substantive changes. This is not their one bite at the apple.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, then with that, I'll turn this over to a presentation from the applicant and those in favor. You have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And if you'd please introduce yourselves as well.
Sure. Good morning, members of the commission. My name is Charles Walker. I'm with Entitlement Preservation Group 275 North Pea Ridge in Pittsboro, North Carolina. With me is Tommy Craven with Priest Craven. Here's our civil engineer. And we have Ronald Stevenson with Ramey Kemp, who is our traffic consultant. As always, the staff does a pretty good job of doing a summary, and the staff report is pretty comprehensive. I just want to fill in a couple of holes and bring forth a few high points that we think are important. First of all, we had 3 neighborhood meetings with the surrounding neighbors. We felt like we needed at least 3 to get to where we are today. The most focused, on our side of the table, we feel the most focused questions out there are for land use specifics, hours of operation, and traffic. And I think we have addressed all those as best we can. This project has been in the city of Raleigh for over 100 years, this land. It has been a non-residential use continuously since the 50s. There's never been any residential component on this thing. We want to bring that forward. It is true, the future land use plan we're inconsistent with that, but when we first made the application, the staff saw the changes that were going to be made in the future land use plan, and we do have confirmation from the staff that the staff does support this change to the future land use plan. The biggest thing that we see in this area is that given what is shown around this area as residential to the north and the west and non-residential and really industrial from the east and the south, this is one of the few opportunities to become a transitional use between those two completely both of those uses are not compatible. So what we're trying to do is provide a transitional use. As far as the heights go, we are asking for index 4, and the reason why we're doing that is the structure itself will be 4 stories. However, it would only be seen as 3 stories from the public right-of-way. Those of you may or may not know, Bickett and Fairview diverge in elevation. So as you go down Bickett, it rises. So on the Bickett side, what someone would see would be the parking structure, the parking deck on Bickett, and then 2 stories of apartments on top of that. From Fairview's point of view, you only see 2 stories. That would be the non-residential use, and the parking for that is behind the structure. The only place that you're going to see a four-structure building is if you're standing in the industrial park looking north. So the building itself is 4, but more than 3 is going to be visible. The parking deck for the parking deck access for the residential users will be on Bickett only, and it will be card protected. So if you're pulling into Bickett and you live in the apartment, you pull into that parking deck. The parking decks do not mix internally. They are 2 different stories. They are 2 different levels. The level on the ground floor, the level for the non-residential uses, will be accessible through a drive on Fairview only, so that we have split those 2 uses as trying to respect the neighborhood versus a mixed use across the street. We think that's important. Staff has told you how many goals that we hit for the comprehensive plan. It's actually a total of 11. I won't go into them unless you need me to. And all of the reports and the staff has talked about supporting this case. I'll let Ronald Stevenson talk about traffic because I know the neighbors are more concerned about that. And if you have any engineering questions from Tommy, they can fill in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Ronald Stevenson with Raymond Kemp Associates. We've heard from staff and from Chuck also, and I'll just say it again. I think it's important to note that the residential component of this project is located on Bickett Boulevard, and it has its separate access point. And so what we did was we wanted to take a look at the traffic counts along Bickett and Fairview, and also compare the traffic from the existing zoning to what's being proposed and how that impacts Bickett Boulevard and Fairview. So in looking at Bickett Boulevard, again, as Chuck said and staff has said, the residential uses would come out on Bickett Boulevard, but only the residential uses. And with that being the case, this particular site would generate 140 fewer trips than the existing uses on that property today. So there's less traffic on Bickett Boulevard because of the way we separated the access points. The commercial would have access onto Fairview Road. The traffic surrounding this site, taking a look at the traffic counts, are all relatively low. The surrounding streets are all under 1,000 trips a day, and many of them are in the few hundred trips a day, other than Fairview Road. Fairview Road is about 2,000 trips a day, and it has been that way for many years. I went back and looked historically, and the traffic's been about 2,000 cars a day on Fairview for the last 15 years at least. So the traffic's pretty steady there. Don't expect any traffic impacts here, given the improvements that are going to be made and the way that the site has funneled the access for the commercial and separated the access for the commercial and the residential uses.
Good morning. My name is Tommy Craven. I'm with Priest Craven and Associates, and I want to take just a moment to explain some of the changes that are proposed at Bickett and Greenwood, and the access to the parking deck, to the residential parking deck. In conversations a couple of weeks ago with the transportation staff, we did a little brainstorming and developed some ideas that a realignment of Greenwood and Bickett intersection with a shift to the access to the deck that would align with that Greenwood intersection would slow down traffic and provide safer and more efficient movements for both traffic and pedestrian traffic in that area. So as you can see in the upper right-hand illustration there, we have shifted the access from the east end of the deck to the west end of the deck, and it will align with that realignment of Greenwood and Bickett. Currently, there are very large turning radiuses and lanes there that encourage drivers to drive fast as they go through that intersection. This suggestion from the transportation staff will help with that. This commitment is documented in condition 15, 16, and 17. We also, in that conversation, had discussed how to put on-street parallel parking safely on Bickett, and we worked through those ideas. That's in condition 18, and we also agreed to a bike lane along our frontage on Fairview, which is documented in condition 19. And we'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has about any of those. Thank you.
Thank
Members
you.
of the commission, we just want to make clear the graphics that you are seeing behind you, although the one in the upper right-hand corner has been modified because of the Greenwood revisions from staff. These are the graphics. These are the graphics that we have been showing the neighbors since day one. I just want to make everyone sure that they understand. You have to turn your head to see that one, but these are the same graphics that have been that we've used to describe this project since the beginning. There have been some conditions that are drawn from these graphics, some architectural details like over 50% brick, up to 25% glass, the step back. So there have been a few architectural standards here. But the reason why we have not, and we have explained to the neighbors, the reason why we haven't gotten into picking paint colors on this building is because they are not going to be the builder of this project. The family that has owned this land is owned to be the builder of this project. The family that has owned this land has owned it for decades, and they want to use this and need someone that has more experience and better experience to build this type of building in this area. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. If you have any other questions from the three of us, we'll try to answer as many as we can.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public here that would like to speak in support of this project? Okay, in support? If you're interested in coming in support, please by show of hands. Okay, then we do have some additional time, but we will can bank that if necessary. We'll move on to those opposed. If you are a member of the public that would like to speak in opposition to this project, please come to the front. We'll have 10 minutes to speak. It looks like if there are more than just a handful of you, I would suggest that you work among yourselves to make sure that we have some consolidated comments, and it seems that that may already be the case. So thank you very much. Want to make sure we receive them all.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, good morning. My name is Matt Waters. My address is 1516 Greenwood Street, just a few hundred feet away from the proposed rezoning project. I am an attorney at Jordan Price Law Firm in Raleigh. I am a real estate litigation and commercial and business litigation attorney. I am not here as counsel for any party in this case. However, I'm here as a concerned neighbor, along with several of my other neighbors here in attendance. If anybody is here for this opposition, if you could please raise your hand or stand up. We've got many here in attendance. There were many more who wanted to be here but were not able to be here because of work obligations. I want to thank the commission for the time this morning to speak before you in opposition of this project. We do not oppose the concept of a rezoning and a new development in 5 Points at the end of this children and family park. However, we do oppose this specific application or any application that we think fundamentally and irrevocably alters the character and nature of the Roanoke Park and surrounding streets and neighborhood. So we urge this commission, and I've got some slides this morning that will amplify this concern, but we urge this commission to take a holistic view of this project as it relates not only to our neighborhood, Roanoke Park and surrounding streets, but also as it relates to adjacent and nearby projects, some of which are already operating, but all of which have been announced. And notably, and this is critical, and this is where I think the current application is fundamentally flawed. This is where I think that the Ramey-Kemp traffic analysis is fundamentally flawed. All of these projects that I'm going to talk about that are in the surrounding area came after this applicant started this application process. Just want to kind of orient the commission a little bit about this project. This is Roanoke Park. This is a view facing to the northeast as it concerns this playground. I'll point out this is, well, it's my house is sort of behind the orange slides that you see there in the top left corner. Roanoke Park, this applicant proposes a project of this size and scope, and never before has the city of Raleigh had to weigh the same in relation to a park like Roanoke Park. This is the only park in the city, probably the only park in the entire state that allows toys, which is a huge draw to young children and many families. These toys are left on the park site. The families along Roanoke Park, myself included, have a written agreement with the city as it concerns maintaining this park and managing the toys and other materials around the park. And this project, this proposed rezoning, we believe would fundamentally alter and impact the character and nature of this area. Just further orientation for the staff, the top left corner there is the 5 Points intersection that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The star there towards the center right is the proposed rezoning project. The arrows and the red lines are all of the major traffic points of ingress and egress for the neighborhood and for this project. So you see there at the bottom, you've got the arrows coming off of Capitol Boulevard from headed north. You hit that Fairview flyover and you arrive at the project. You also have obviously Capitol Boulevard south traffic can hit that Fairview exit and enter the project area. Of course, you've got the Glenwood Avenue to Fairview lane of travel from the 5 Points intersection directly down Fairview to this project site. And then you've also got the Roanoke Park Drive, and you've got Bickett off of Whitaker Mill, Roanoke Park Drive off of Glenwood Avenue, and you've got Bickett, Dare, and the surrounding streets there, all of which funnel traffic to this proposed project area and to the other commercial uses that are there now, one of which just opened. I think one thing that's important to point out, there are no sidewalks around the park on Cherokee or Greenwood Street. That necessarily forces pedestrians onto the streets. So as these proposed projects that are down at the end of the street come online, there's more pedestrians on the streets. Those pedestrians are forced onto the streets. Young children are forced onto the streets. There are poor no parking signs. So one thing to emphasize here, the interior perimeter around Roanoke Park has posted no parking signs, but those are very poorly marked. Cars already park on the edge of Roanoke Park, which is very dangerous because that would make it more difficult for vehicular traffic to see children who are entering and exiting the park between those vehicles. The signage around the park is Greenwood and Cherokee streets are one-way streets. Those signs are poorly marked. Vehicles, the primary mode of traffic, the one-way direction on Greenwood Street is to the south, and on Cherokee it's to the north. But cars routinely come in the wrong direction on both of those streets, and particularly vehicles that are unfamiliar with the neighborhood. Even as recent as this morning, on my way here, there were cars coming in the wrong direction and parking on Greenwood Street. That's dangerous because the children in the neighborhood in particular know that those streets are one way, and so when they're crossing the streets, they're typically only looking in the direction of traffic that they know to be the typical direction. The traffic analysis, which I'll get into more detail in just a moment, we believe has been flawed. The application before the commission suggests a trip reduction of 140 trips per day. That just completely defies logic and doesn't comport with the uses that are there now. We think that assumes that all of the visitors to this project, to the commercial uses, will use Fairview and not Bickett. But as you'll see in just a moment, there are problems already created by one of the projects that's already opened. So moving to that point, you see there in the middle, you've got the subject property, and just to my right, you have Aja. That is a restaurant that has just opened as of last week. That is a very small space. But this past Sunday, there were 84 cars. So we're going to supplement our materials that we presented to the commission after this meeting. But on Sunday, there were 16 cars parked at my left of the subject property in an existing parking lot, 15 cars in front of the small businesses, 14 cars where you see where Trophy Brewing is coming, 9 cars parked on Bickett, 4 cars parked on Greenwood, 11 on Cherokee, and 14 on Hanover. These are 83 incremental cars not belonging to the existing neighborhood. I think that's notable because the applicant has a commercial parking deck with only 60 spaces. So just that traffic impact just from Aja would have overwhelmed the commercial space available parking spaces within the applicant's 60 parking spaces. Aja, which is that restaurant in the middle of this project, advertises on its website that available parking for that restaurant is on the surrounding streets. There was a news article that was written up by Eric Ginsberg of Carolina Eatery. He writes that Trophy Brewing recently announced it will, and he was writing about Aja. He writes that Trophy Brewing recently announced it will open a new location directly next door to the colorful Aja, which will no doubt help the restaurant stay afloat, but also complicate parking. So you've got folks that are writing articles about Aja, which again, Aja is a project that was announced after this application process started.
Thank you. Mr. Waters, may I just pause for just a quick moment? I want to make sure that, are there any other members of the public here signed up to speak that are not sort of being consolidated under these comments? I want to make sure we leave time for anyone else. Is that correct? We have an additional speaker? Anyone else? Just one more? I would like to make sure that we hear from all interested parties. So if you could wrap up your comments pretty quickly, we'd appreciate it.
All right, and again, I think that the traffic and parking hasn't been properly accounted for by this application. This application came after the Carson Street condos on Carson, the proposed 20 townhomes on Sunrise that are on their way, the Bright Spot and Commercial Capital Associates development at the end of Sunrise, Trophy Brewing, which will have both a tap room and canning space, the Aja restaurant, this subject property. The commission we urge the commission to take a step back with this project, have the applicant work with the neighborhood to address these parking and traffic concerns so that we can not fundamentally impact to the negative our neighborhood and the park.
Thank you. I believe we have another speaker. Thank you. I know there's only 26 seconds left on the clock. Without objection, I'd like to add another minute or so. Do you have any additional?
I need more than 26 seconds.
That's right. I'll add an additional 2 minutes to the clock in this case.
Thank you. Members of the commission, thank you for seeing me. Stephen Porterfield, president of Capital Associates, which owns the building that was referenced a moment ago at 1501 Sunrise. And I did not come prepared. I didn't know that I was going to speak, but I'm not sure the best way to get a picture of it. But we are literally, if you look at the railroad tracks and go to the east, we are probably 200 yards away. Our property is the low-lying property. We are a 38,000 square foot old warehouse that we can convert it to office. Our office and others are there to include Bright Spot Donuts and coffee. We have a lower level that is storage, and our stormwater flows, and basically the stormwater for the entire basin flows to through our storm system and flows under the railroad tracks. Because of two primary culprits, we receive significantly more water than I think was necessarily intended to be. We have water that runs from the north to us through the neighborhood where we've had more and more houses torn down and built with greater impervious surface. But specific to this site, water flows down Bickett, flows down Hanover, and if you look at this picture, Hanover is right here. Hits basically Bickett Road, jumps Bickett Road onto the wooded section, which is city-owned, and then basically turns and heads to our storm system, creating an overflowing dynamic that floods our storage units. And so my only request today that is, as you rezone this, and I believe this is city, that we look to what's occurring with that stormwater. It really needs to head to the west. And if it's going to cross Fairview, cross there where there's only limited railroad tracks versus where we are is a rail yard where work is happening on the trains. And it would be infeasible to bore under that rail yard and add more storm pipe. So just a request to look at the storm system as we go through to help us with the flooding. So that was quick.
Thank you. And then with that, we will bring it back to the table for discussions and comments from the planning commissioners. Who would like to kick us off? Commissioner Bennett.
I have lots of questions, but I want to start with the conditions that we were given. We have 18, but the applicant was referencing 19. Do we have the current?
It's 18, I'm sorry.
It's 18?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we had the most current. That's it for right now. I'll let others go while I gather my thoughts.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This one, picking through everything. I'm very familiar with the case. My kids play in this park and have attended the camp at Wild at Art next door. Very familiar with the traffic and parking issues there, and I look forward to tackling them at this table. Commissioner Lamon.
I got confused by the count. There's 19?
There's 18. It was misspoke. It's it's 18.
And I apologize, in the staff report, they are misnumbered.
Which one is missing? Which one? Is it
1
just-
and 2 in the staff report is just 1.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Miller. In general, I'd like to say that I think that I like the scale and the mixed use coming to this site. I think it's totally appropriate. Under the current light industrial zoning, there's a lot of incompatible neighborhood uses that could be coming to here. For instance, I was just looking up the rules, and it could be a big brewery with very little restriction on parking. So I'd like to point out that one of the consequences if this zoning gets denied would be a less compatible use coming to this corner with less control and thought. I think that I should point out that the property is planning on changing hands, so we're not talking to the folks that own the property now. And so I appreciate the intentions, but I think that the guarantees we get about what looks like here are in the zoning and the conditions. So we have to be very careful to stick straight to that. I have a question. This is for transportation staff. Does the rezoning and the conditions commit the city to doing the hardscape improvements on Greenwood? Is that under the, or will the developer be responsible for those streetscape improvements?
Good morning, Monique Guyot with Transportation. I believe the conditions do not specify who would be responsible for those improvements.
So is the city committed as part of this development to make those changes, or is that just would have to be a city decision later independent of the development?
No, currently the city is not committed to these improvements.
Thank you. I believe the applicant has a follow-up.
If we need to make revisions to make it clear, the developer is going to make those changes.
Okay, thank you very much. I should have kept you up here, I'm sorry. This, I believe, redevelopment of the site would be a Tier 3 redevelopment plan, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't that commit the applicant to installing a bike lane on Fairview anyway? Fairview being a avenue?
That is correct, that the designation for Fairview does include a separated bikeway. I'm not sure if this is a Tier 3 site plan. If it is, that is our UDO requirement. And the condition to install a bike lane is a lesser improvement.
The rezoning doesn't require them to submit a Tier 3 site plan. If they were to, yes, the lane would be required, but there's a lot that could happen here that would not require a Tier 3 plan.
Okay, thank you. The one thing that I have that's really giving me the most heartburn is the urban frontage, and so I'll get into that. Right now we have, and thank you, that's all for transportation. Right now we have active uses along the street fronting the neighborhood and the park, which I think is wonderful. It fosters community, it puts eyes on the street. It's an active place. The current plan is to replace that active use with a parking wall, which I believe is prohibited under the urban limited frontage. So if we grant this frontage, the plans that we have here for where this parking deck would go are infeasible, I believe. Do you wish to address that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for catching that. Wish you were there when we were all ignoring that fact. The urban, the UL designation is subject to Fairview Road, but we did not make the connection to Bickett. Staff had notified us about that yesterday, that there was a concern. So what we would attempt to do in future meetings, we would remove the UL designation on this, because we believe we would all be burned to the ground if we started talking about bringing storefronts down Bickett in addition to this project. So there are conditions in the case that talk about screening and landscaping the parking deck wall. The architecture of that thing will be an open, both decks will be open to the air. They're not going to be climate controlled or anything like that. So there are conditions in the case that talk about screening with architectural walls, and also with landscaping and with street trees.
Okay. Thank you. And I got to say, I can't vote for any rezoning that would replace active use with a parking deck along the street. And that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Yeah, and to clarify that point, the reason for not having active uses along the frontage was because of the neighbors' concerns about that?
Well, not necessarily directly the neighbors of concerns, but if we have active uses along Bickett, then the parking, the available parking, which everyone seems to be very concerned about, would actually go down. So the potential for non-resident uses would go up, the parking spaces would go down, and we don't think that's a very good situation. While I'm staying up here, I just want to make note of this graphic here. When they talk about the parking spaces with Asia Restaurant has 2 designated parking spaces. The Trophy Brewing is 22,000 and about the same size of our project with 30 parking spaces. Our project has 128 parking spaces that we have shielded and built into the architecture of the building to try and minimize the splashback damage to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Yes.
So I will point out for the neighbors here and for my fellow commissioners that the best way to keep people from driving somewhere is to restrict the parking where they're going. If you provide ample parking, you will increase the traffic in your neighborhood. The more restricted the parking is, the less traffic you will get. Those are trade-offs. So, and again, I don't think that I can support a parking garage where we have active use. So, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. My questions are transportation related. Just for some clarification, the 140 fewer trips, does that refer to, is it 140 fewer trips than are currently existing, or 140 fewer trips than would be allowed under the current entitlement?
Monique Guy with Transportation. Is the 140 trips from our staff report?
That's from, I'm sorry, maybe that's for the applicant. I believe that was from the Ramey Kemp traffic analysis.
Okay, and I also just wanted to add a clarification that city staff hasn't reviewed this traffic analysis by Ramey Kemp.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll still ask the question, but thanks.
I'll just jump in. Yeah, that number is not from the staff evaluation, but the staff evaluation of traffic is from the current entitlement to the proposed entitlement.
Okay, so your evaluation showed a decrease as well, did it?
Yes, not-
And that's over the current entitlement? Okay.
So the 140 fewer trips was over a daily period, and it was similar to what staff was saying. It was we ran a trip generation for the current retail commercial square footage on the property, and it generates a certain number of trips. And then we looked at what we were looking at is the traffic that would be coming out the driveway onto Bickett, and that's the 140 fewer trips.
Okay. There were also some comments about whether or not the Ramey Kemp analysis accounted for other developments in the area, other new developments. What exactly was included in your analysis?
Yeah, what we did was we went back and looked at the historical traffic counts, particularly along Fairview, and the other surrounding streets, and we took traffic counts to understand how much traffic is on the surrounding roadways in the neighborhood. So we got a snapshot of the traffic that was there on those streets, and on Hanover, Greenwood, Bickett, Cherokee, and Fairview, to understand what traffic is actually on those streets today. And I say today, when we did the counts in April, and we've been working on this for a while, but it was back in April of 21. So we wanted to understand that. I actually compared, so the data we actually took on these streets, I wanted to compare it to the data that NCDOT maintains on these surrounding streets. And, the one common street is Fairview. And I just did want to point out that the counts we took on Fairview were 1,900 trips a day, and the DOT's estimate for that time was right about that same number. It was 2,000 trips on Fairview at the same location. So we were in our study, we did make some adjustment for COVID. We took the count in 2021. So we did adjust it for COVID and actually increased our projections for what the traffic would be to 2,300 trips a day. So if you compare our data that we collected versus what NCDOT collected at Fairview, it's right on. So we feel like our data is accurate when comparing to DOT's data.
Okay, thank you. I will say, listening to the comments and reading through the emails, it seems like there are some existing traffic concerns independent of this request. So I'm wondering if there are things that perhaps the city should look into addressing, whether this happens or not. Because it sounds like even if we were to vote or to recommend denial of this, there are some concerns that would remain around the park and with parking and safety. So what I'm trying to balance is, I don't want to make the condition worse, but at the same time, I don't want to hold this applicant responsible for fixing something that's going to be there independent of them. So are there things that perhaps the city could look into addressing related to these traffic concerns, parking in the wrong places or going the wrong way down the street, whether or not this happens? Because safety, of course, is very important. So I guess my question, I don't know if that's for transportation, if that's for Hannah, but are there things that the city could do to make mobility and safety in this area, to improve it, regardless of what happens here? I don't think it would be appropriate to make some of those items conditions in this rezoning, because it seems like the issues exist independent of the rezoning.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I have a list of some of those proposed changes that have sort of come to light too, so that staff might address some of those. If we could get either Hannah or someone from transportation to address one of those.
Can I have a moment just to address Madam Commissioner's question that was addressed by the applicant? I think that it goes on both sides.
In a moment, we'll circle back to you. Thank you. So specifically on this item related to parking, I know that the neighbors addressed that there were limited parking, or essentially no driveways for many of these homes, and that it's street parking. Has this neighborhood already reviewed or undertaken the parking permits, neighborhood parking permits along in this area? Is this something that the staff can address? And I know that there's also a public park running through the center, so there may be some limited ability to put in parking permit only spots along the street.
I don't know the answer to that. I would have to look into that. Maybe some of the neighbors that are here can speak to that, but I can do some research.
Sure. That was some of the ones that came to light. Parking, the limited neighborhood parking permits along these streets. If there is public parking, so you do need to have some from the general public, perhaps a limited hours or time limit for the parking. It also sounds like the signage in this neighborhood could use meaningful improvement for both areas where there's no parking, and then also improvement of demonstrating what streets are one-way streets and in what direction. Again, being very familiar, going to this park a lot. When I first started going, I went the wrong way down the one-way streets, probably a few times before I even realized it was an issue. These may be citywide. We instituted last year, or the year before, a new a text change that had no minimum parking requirements. And the way that we instead wanted to deal with that in neighborhoods that would have overflow parking from commercial uses is that we could put in neighborhood only. We go on a case-by-case basis in each neighborhood and put in neighborhood permits in those streets so that the general public would not be allowed to park on neighborhood streets. So that's sort of what could perhaps be a solution to this existing issue today, as would be improving signage. And any other suggestions to parking and safety improvements on this area would be from staff or from the public. Highlighting specific issues would also be of interest for me personally, for sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
what about enforcement, parking enforcement, working with local officers to ensure that we have more patrol, to ensure that these measures that are put in place are adhered to? And so if there's more tickets, then making sure that folks are adhering to those rules once that signage, those neighborhood parking parking passes, or making sure those things are enforced, so folks get the message. You park in the wrong place, you're going to pay the fine, because at the end of the day, I'm worried about the kids.
Oh yeah.
You got this park, and it did resonate to me. You've got these babies who know that it's a one-way street, so they're not looking both ways. I don't want anybody's kid to be hit as they're walking across the street. So as we're thinking about different measures to put in place. So just as one thing, I want to make sure that we are also taking into consideration.
Thank you. And for next time, if we could also get more information about incident reports, in addition to the traffic impact analysis, safety issues for pedestrian incidents and other accidents in this area, that'd be helpful.
Chair Miller.
Yes.
Can I make a recommendation? I agree with all of the comments. It seems like, or the comments surrounding the parking on the park. But agreeing with Ms. Bennett, these are independent of this rezoning. So while we're identifying these, I would think the best path forward, since the neighborhood is mobilized and has a single point of contact, is that they get with the city and understand who they need to meet with the city, because sometimes that's the hardest thing to navigate in determining how to get changes made to your neighborhood. So I agree with all of those comments, but it is independent of this rezoning. So I think to keep the discussion going around the merits of the case, I would suggest that the neighbors get with the city after this meeting and make sure they're connecting with the right people and meeting at the city to deal with some of these issues that are very clearly existing.
Thank you. Yes, that was the other follow-up comment, is which of these items, if addressed, would be part of a rezoning case and conditions? Because it doesn't seem to me like that many of them could be addressed by any rezoning conditions. In particular, I was thinking maybe signage, increasing signage, but but it's most likely that the applicant would not be entitled to change the signage outside of their parcel. I don't know that that's the case, but I wanted to confirm that. But to Commissioner Haver's point, I just wanted to sort of reiterate that to the neighbors, that there are options for protecting your parking spots. And do you know who within the city might be a good person for the neighbors to reach out to with respect to neighborhood parking permits? Great. Thank you, Ms. Blank. I appreciate that. Any other sources or contacts that you might recommend for the neighbors?
I can share the contacts for the parking, permit parking program.
Okay, or is it generally available on the city website? I want to stay focused on the rezoning case. Okay.
Can I
yes.
similarly to the way we ask applicants to go above and beyond, I think I'd like to ask the city to also go above and beyond to connect, because I've sent emails to the city with no response or not sure who to meet with. So it's very clear we can all get on the website. What I'm asking is that the city, outside of this zoning case, or the neighborhoods, come together and get with the city, and let's make sure they connect so that we can deal with the safety issues in this neighborhood.
Good point. Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
I just want to circle back to my comments and questions that kind of started all this and spiraled just a little bit.
Yeah.
I was saying, I guess similar to Commissioner O'Haver, was a lot of this seems independent of the rezoning. And I want to make sure that the neighbors are aware of how they can interact with the city to get some of these things done. But I also want to make sure that the neighbors are aware that the burden is not necessarily on this applicant to put conditions in this case to address all of those existing issues that this applicant did not create. So all we can do at this table is discuss this rezoning and discuss what this applicant can do to make this the best request. So if there are conditions that could be included, that aren't included, to enhance safety or mobility, then I would like to hear about those. The other items that we can't deal with, the city and the neighborhood can communicate to address those. I just want to be clear that there are some things we can't address at this table as part of this rezoning.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Can I, sorry.
Were we still, I want to make sure that we may need to stay at the table for just a moment so we can finish our discussion on these items.
Commissioner Raines, if I could, similarly, I'm curious about Mr. Porterfield's comments about the stormwater. I didn't follow everything on there, and I was trying to look some information up, but from the marks on the screen, it also appears that these conditions are outside. So I see Mr. Porterfield and staff, so if I could hear from both.
My first turn. You want to go first? She's familiar with it.
Good morning, Sally Hoyt, Raleigh Stormwater. I spoke to Mr. Porterfield in the hall earlier this morning and had a few minutes to research his concern. Hannah, is there a bigger map we can get on the screen?
My point being, if there are some conditions that we can add that would help, I would like to consider them. If they're sort of outside, I want to know and not continue to discuss that.
All right. So you see the site. This location, I believe, is Mr. Porterfield's property. There is a drainage divide approximately here behind Trophy, the 207 Bickett, and flow comes down Hanover, turns and goes this direction. So in looking at this at a high level, it appears that the subject site already drains towards Fairview, and there's nothing that could be done on the subject property to push the additional flow that comes off Hanover and Fairview in that direction. That a project of that undertaking would involve 207 Bickett and the railroad right-of-way. So I believe that from similar to some of the other issues raised, that while this is a concern that could be addressed with staff, I don't believe there's anything that could be done on the subject property.
Yeah, I don't know that it's on the subject property. My biggest concern is that the site continue to flow to the west or south of this map. And the ideal the city would address taking the water, because there's not a problem with it in this direction that comes down from Hanover and Bickett. But understand that may not be for the rezoning.
I can confirm that during site permitting review, staff does ensure that water continues to flow off the site in the direction it does under existing conditions.
But I think, isn't there an opportunity in certain occasions to, my understanding is that high point is right at the site and a portion of it is going east, a portion is going west, or is all of the site heading to the west currently?
All of this, it appears based on topography that all of the subject site flows to the west currently. It appears that the property occupied by Aja and the one occupied by Trophy appears to be where the watershed divide.
Okay, and during site plan review, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's determined that there is a portion of the site that heads west, there are opportunities, if it is a small drainage area, that the city does allow some variances to the way you deal with stormwater and take it to the east. So again, I think during site review, when you get into those details, there might be an opportunity for Mr. Porterfield and his group to make sure that if there is issues heading to the east, to discuss potentially making a minor revision to the flow and sending it to the west.
Do you allow revised flow paths if the peak discharge under existing conditions is still met? So it requires over treatment, but we do have some applicants that do that. I will speak to Mr. Porterfield about getting his flooding documented in our system, in which would make it considered in any future case that drains in that direction.
Thank you. I wanted to circle back momentarily for future meetings. I know that there is some concern with the neighbors about the traffic impact analysis, and staff said that they had not had a chance to review that item. If it sounds like we will be holding this at the table and deferring to a future meeting, will staff have an opportunity before that next meeting to review that TIA and address some of those concerns?
Hello, Monique Guyant with Transportation. So the analysis that was completed by Ramey Kemp was not requested by the city. We don't have any knowledge, as far as I know, of this traffic analysis. So currently, based off of this rezoning, we didn't require a rezoning TIA, but possibly during site plan, because there is a railroad nearby, it may be required.
So is that not something, if the city doesn't request it, it's not something that the city typically reviews?
Correct. It's up to the company to provide that to us.
Understood. Commissioner Bennett?
Could we request that it be reviewed since it was done? And since traffic is such an issue, since a TIA was done, could we request that the city review it?
Yes.
So could we make that request
Please,
as a
yes.
commission?
Yes, I've got that here. I'm making a list for next time. And then we'll be ready for a more fulsome discussion on those traffic items with the neighbors for next time as well.
Chair Miller,
Rhodes,
just
yes.
on that note, we're still identifying the TIA based on the subject site only, right? Not the entire development that's to the east with Trophy. It's just focused on this one particular site. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
So, I mean, I'm just wondering, if we're going to go to this effort, do we need to look comprehensively at the entire development? And I don't want to put that on the applicant, but I'm wondering if that's something that the city can take on somehow. I'm not sure how that works, but.
So if I could please add to that, my understanding was, which I had a question about as well, that on Bickett, the study was done for existing zoning versus proposed zoning, only looking at the site specifically. But on Fairview, it was actually counts of trips, and so I'm just curious why it's two different methods of measuring that traffic.
We're stuck in a lot of gray here. The traffic counts that Rhino had spoke about had been done on streets other than Bickett and Fairview. I think he mentioned Greenwood and Cherokee also, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't focused just on Bickett. The levels of traffic of changes from existing to proposed were so small, and in some case negative, then by city code it's not required to have a TIA. But we knew that traffic was very important to the neighborhoods, so we did traffic counts and traffic analysis in an effort to try and inform the neighborhood what was going on and what was expected from us. The road revisions that are in the conditions are all on us. The parallel parking spaces, the realignment of Greenwood, all that kind of stuff, that's all on us. And if that's not clear in the conditions, we'll make it clear. And obviously, I don't believe we're going to have I'd love to, but I don't think there's going to be a decision made today. I've spoken with Rhino, with Ramey Kemp, and by the time we come to to the next meeting, I've asked them to update their traffic counts that would now take in Asia and Trophy and all those places. We still think the conditions that we provide are still going to be the same, but we want the city and the neighborhood to understand that we're doing the right stuff.
Quick note for you, I studied the traffic tables that were presented. There's a bunch of charts for all the different streets for current speeds and projected volumes. It would be great, and I think the neighbors might appreciate seeing those in chart form, coming through a bunch of tables and looking at speeds and categories. Sometimes doesn't paint a clear picture.
Again, we got caught in the gray spot about providing a form in the way that the professionals read it so everyone can talk between us and the city. So we will try to do something that is more user-friendly to describe the situation.
Thank you. Commissioner Lampman.
I just want to, there's a lot of discussion on, I think, the current pain points that exist today. But in reviewing this case and hearing the communication, I think that there's a lot of good opportunity here. So I appreciate the level of commitment that the applicant has made towards this case as well, looking at the conditions, providing site plans. A lot of this conversation we don't usually get in our applications. So I think I'm excited about what can potentially go here. So I think to support the commissioner's comments, I think that there's good opportunity for conversation about frontage, about stormwater, about parking, and you're already providing more parking, and I think you're already providing an opportunity to calm some traffic patterns on the road that goes up to the park. So I think that there's been a lot of conversation about, the pain points today, but I think that there's some cool things that can really happen here. So I'm excited about where this conversation's going to go. I just wanted to kind of interject a little bit of optimism in that.
Thank you. Commissioner Raines.
A couple of questions, I think for traffic. On Fairview, does the city plan to continue a bike lane in the future? I would like some clarification on any crosswalks from the subject site to the park or adjacent properties. I know that they developed a plan for Greenwood, but I'm not clear on what exactly connections for pedestrians are being made. And then I have a question about massing in a minute.
Hi again, Monique Guyant with Transportation. So on Fairview, we do not have any planned or funded projects to extend or expand the bikeway network. In the area, we are currently working on the 5-point streetscape study, which is more so on which includes like Glenwood, Fairview, Whitaker Mill Road. So that's northwest of the site, but close to the site, there are no current plans.
Okay. And could you respond to any definitive discussions on where the crosswalks would occur along Bickett?
I believe from the conditions that are proposed, they're, if approved by the city, painted crosswalks would be installed at Cross Bickett Boulevard at the new, I don't have a good picture, but the new revised aligned intersection. I think the applicant. Thank you. So I just drawn it? Okay. Or not. Okay. There's an opportunity to have a new crosswalk or a new intersection here with coordination with the applicant or like the developer. We could have some additional intersection improvements such as like raised crosswalks, our standard crosswalks, or even median refuge, so allowing pedestrians like a break when they cross over lanes. I think that's the most I can talk about the crosswalks that are being provided or proposed.
Okay, I would just suggest that there would be a little bit more definition on what that crosswalk would be, if it's a hump, if it's a divided, or what, and the actual location in the graphic. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, yes. Transportation did communicate to the applicant that we would want some more specificity with these conditions.
Thank you. Just one quick question on massing. I may not have fully understood this. I don't know if this is for the staff or the applicant, but they established 3-story along Bickett and 2-story along Fairview. I believe that's what the condition shows. But if you could clarify, the graphic shows something that I wasn't anticipating, that actually creeps into Bickett, the 2-story, with a amenity deck, I guess. I guess I would just like some more definition within the condition that says exactly where it starts and stops, because the way I read it, you could have a 3-story going all the way to Fairview and then 2-story along Fairview. So I was just confused on where.
We can absolutely make that for clarity, because that is our intent, 2 on Fairview, 3 on Beckett. While the wonderful graphic is up here, I want to stretch my finger across this as also. The idea of straightening out Greenwood is in its infancy when the Transportation Department brought it to us about a week and a half ago, so we had been working on it. So what the agreement was at this point was to realign Greenwood as it's sketched here. We would move our access point for the residential parking to line up with that so that it becomes a 4-legged intersection. We're also going, our conditions also talk about removing that little weird off-ramp looking thing, and the crosswalks would go from here to here. That's what's currently in our conditions.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. So I think I can start to summarize we have a number of items coming back for next time, but we can add some more. Yep, Commissioner Bennett.
Just one last thing. I just want to be clear. My request for staff to review the TIA was not meant as a critique of the applicant. I recognize that you went above and beyond by providing the TIA, which was not requested. But when we were asking questions about it and we were getting responses that staff hadn't seen it, that's why I wanted to make sure that staff reviewed it so that we would all be on the same page and we could know that the information we were looking at and asking questions about had been reviewed and approved by staff. But I do recognize that you did something that you didn't have to do, and I appreciate that you did that. So I just want to make sure I was not critiquing. I do critique a lot. I was not critiquing that time, so thank you.
Commissioner Haver.
Just a few remaining points. It was mentioned earlier that the intent is not necessarily for this owner to develop this site, and in the staff report under the outstanding issues, they mentioned specifically about a need to ensure that the language for the conditions are clear, so we don't need to get into that now. I just, when this thing's coming back, I want to make sure staff can stand up here and say that they've addressed those and put that in the report. I would also like to confirm that the one inconsistency in the future land use map, it's still median to median. It's just that with the current zoning, there's a larger range of uses, correct? But it's not changing the intensity. Is that correct? You had mentioned that in your presentation.
Is this the future land use map consistency or the?
Yeah, isn't that the part that's inconsistent?
Yeah,
The reason it's inconsistent is because of the larger range of uses, not medium-scale residential.
That's right.
So it's currently medium-scale. It stays medium-scale. The zoning classification allows a larger range of uses, thus it's inconsistent.
Yes, it's inconsistent with medium-scale residential because of the commercial uses.
Right. Well, I want to clarify one other thing then, if I could. In that table, in your table in the presentation, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. Where did it go? One second. Here we go. Under the existing, yes, perfect. Thank you. You got to it quicker than I did. Under the existing zoning, the office and retail square footage can actually be larger than what's proposed.
And there's a whole bunch of industrial.
Right, I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this, because sometimes we say, oh, there's some confusion there, et cetera, but the office and retail square footage is actually decreasing and the units are going up by 19. So I just want to make sure that that's accurate and I'm clear
estimate,
on that.
yeah.
Okay.
And on the current zone, the proposed zoning, that's would be informed by the zoning conditions. But as Commissioner Lightman mentioned, what's not on this table is the industrial.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is positive. That's why I just want to make sure it's accurate. Not being critical. I just want to make sure I'm looking at this properly. But the last comment I had, we've had a lot of conversation around this. I agree with Commissioner Otwell. Thank you for pointing that out. I did not realize that the frontage along the street there that has existing uses along Bickett is going to be a dressed up parking deck. I'm not sure. This might go against what some of the neighbors' intentions or beliefs are, but I agree. I think having active uses along that street, I live in a neighborhood that has small retail areas like this, and we have people walking to shops, and I'm not sure at the end of the day I'm going to be able to support a parking deck along Bickett. So I would really encourage the applicant to take a look at that. And I understand, again, part of that is due to parking and other things. I'm not sure I'd be able to support that when y'all come back.
Can I address that point?
I don't know if everything needs to be addressed. It's going to come back, and so I'm just putting my concerns and issues out so that when it does come back, people are clear on where I stand when y'all come back to the table. So I'm not sure there's a need to address it at this point.
At this point, we are just trying to make a list of items that we need to discuss at the next meeting to follow up about. Commissioner Lampman?
Yeah, just want to support, because there's a lot of discussion. It does eliminate almost 100,000 square feet of industrial office space potential. So all of that goes away as well. The parking deck, I also want to agree with that, because I think the railroad track is a better situation to have, a view of a parking deck than people driving by or people living nearby. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions and comments from the table at this time? Okay, well then running through the issues for next time, the category of adding clarity to the conditions. This is listed as an outstanding issue in the staff report, that the condition language needs to ensure that the conditions are clear and enforceable. We have a number of items listed there. One of them is with respect to the street improvements. The applicant has indicated they're willing to provide that clarity. A second item is with the crosswalks, adding clarity there. And then also a third item is location of the 2-story versus the 3-story cutoff and where those will be located. Have I missed any other clarity of conditions items with those three. With respect to the traffic impact analysis, the developer is going to update that TIA and staff will review it so that at the next meeting, we will be prepared to discuss the merits of the TIA with the neighbors. With respect to the urban limited frontage, that's an item for the applicant to review. With moving the parking deck potentially to another location and activating those street uses, even if that means limiting parking. And I just want to, and then there's stormwater. I wanted to clarify, we did not identify any additional conditions that the applicant could include in this rezoning case. Instead, the opportunities would perhaps occur during site plan. Is that correct, Commissioner Haver and staff? I think that was my understanding. And then with respect to traffic and parking, we identified opportunities for the neighbors and the city to undertake to protect their existing street parking and address safety issues, but we did not identify any new rezoning conditions that this applicant could include in this case. Is that correct? And in fact, once we have the TIA verification, that will assist with evaluating this case in particular with respect to the traffic, including if it indeed, we have accurately discussed that this project cannot address the existing traffic conditions, but it sounds like under the current TIA, if it's accurate, the property owner could in fact develop this and may to something more robust under the existing entitlement. So look forward to seeing the traffic impact analysis to see if in fact this new development would actually reduce the number of trips in this neighborhood. Have I missed anything?
I mean, this has been a conversation full of nuance, so I apologize, but I just want to make sure if there are some conditions that staff identifies as far as improving traffic and safety, then I think the expectation would be that they would put in. It's just we haven't determined what those are at the table.
Absolutely.
And then I don't know, I may be confused on the stormwater comment that, did stormwater say that there's nothing that can be done for stormwater on this site?
With respect to a rezoning condition, yes. There may be opportunities during site plan, but not as a rezoning.
Right, because the flow is not coming from the property in the rezoning request. It's coming from a different property and railroad right-of-way. So the applicant can't address that on their property because the problem's not on their property.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments for next time? Commissioner Bennett.
Not for next time, but I just want to, first of all, thank everyone who came out and provided comment and your emails. We did read them. And Chair Miller, if you would just clarify for members of the public, because I have seen hands go up, people wanting to speak, and just how the public hearing works, that we aren't ignoring you, we aren't not listening to you, but there was the designated 10 minutes per side, and to take additional comment, we would have to add time to each side. So we see your hands, we see you up here, we're not ignoring you. We do all value your comments. I just wanted to make sure that you understand, we're not ignoring you, there's just a process that we have to follow.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. And we also, and there's always that tension on wanting to make sure we hear everything, and at the same time, we effectively move through the agenda so that folks that are attending for future cases as well also get an opportunity to be heard. So I thank you, everyone, and I look forward to continuing this discussion on this case for the next item. Yes, Mr. York.
We'll need to defer it to a date specific.
Okay.
So are we looking at the first meeting in August, which is the 8th?
Okay.
Is that enough time? Oh.
It is. Yes. The deadline for action is not until the end of August, so we could have up to 2 additional regular planning commission meetings to hear this case. So without objection, I will defer this case to our August 8th planning commission regular meeting with those updates. And I did want to just highlight for the applicant is only allowed to make 1 round of substantive changes to the conditions on this case. So if you are reviewing this this option, and perhaps there's something related to any of the conditions, or urban limited frontage, or if staff identifies a new condition with you about mitigating safety concerns, and you're not prepared to finalize all of your conditions at the next meeting, perhaps we can get a draft of those, so that if we needed, we could make additional changes at the next meeting as well. Thank you. Okay. And with that item is deferred. We will respond to the TIA questions at the next meeting. Thank you. We're not prepared to do that until the staff can review that item. Moving on to our next item, item E2, text change to zoning conditions, TCZ 1623, the Midtown Exchange Assemblage. This case is to change zoning conditions for approximately 39.41 acres east of Wake Forest Road along St. Albans and Benson Drive. I'll now turn to Bronwyn Redis for a staff presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bronwyn Redis with Planning and Development. Next case is an assemblage along St. Albans Drive and Benson Drive. You'll maybe remember this as the Midtown Exchange site, I think also referred to as the Exchange Raleigh now. The request is to amend zoning conditions. The existing zoning districts of commercial mixed use, 7 stories, parking limited frontage, conditional use, commercial mixed use, 20 stories, conditional use, and then conservation management, conditional use will be remaining the same. So no changes to height with this request. Zoning in the area is predominantly commercial mixed use and office mixed use. In the next slide, you'll be able to see North Hills is over off to the east, or actually to the west, apologies. To the east is the Duke Hospital, and then north and south we have some residential, higher densities to the south and to the west, and then up north there's some lower scale residential. The 440 Beltline is just to the south. Here are some views of the site, east facing on St. Albans and west facing on St. Albans. There is construction activity already going on out here based on the current zoning. So that's what you can see here. And then moving into the changes to conditions, there are a lot of conditions here. I just included them all in the presentation in case we want to refer back to them, but definitely we'll try to highlight the changes. Other conditions speak to prohibiting uses, prohibiting maybe potential negative impacts with those intense uses. But to focus in on the specific changes. First of all, they are removing the heliport not serving hospitals use from the prohibited uses list. And then taking out the bar, nightclub, tavern, lounge use being at least 300 feet from the right-of-way of St. Albans Drive, and replacing that with a different condition, as you'll see in condition number 2, that no outdoor seating or a primary public entrance associated with that specific use being on that side facing the St. Albans Road right-of-way. Again, a lot of existing conditions that are not changing with this request. Here at number 12, you'll see there has been an addition to this condition. First portion says building and parking setback of 20 feet along St. Albans Drive, specifically for 800 St. Albans Drive. And I believe the applicant will be able to point out exactly where in the site this is going to apply to. But then secondly, they've added that there will be an average building and parking setback of 10 feet along St. Albans Drive for a second property. So just kind of drilling in, getting a little bit more specific for those setbacks there. I'll point out what has been proposed is either more restrictive than what the UDO would require for any kind of building type, or consistently restrictive for the various building types that might be allowed in commercial mixed use. Again, several zoning conditions that aren't going to be requested to be changed. Okay, and then finally, we get to this one. It's pretty big. Basically, this condition was offering development scenarios with land use caps, and then residential unit caps. So in lieu of this, the developer has requested a trip budget, which would put a cap on the traffic that's being generated by the project, but would provide more flexibility on the particular land uses that would be allowed. So they will be able to speak a little bit more to why that's needed, but that's a big condition. Happy to answer any questions about that. But with that particular change, you'll see there is an increase in entitlement, and that's because the removal of the land use caps allows for an increase in entitlement. But the trip budget, as you can see here, didn't exist before, but we've got it now. And I will say this trip budget is taken from the traffic impact analysis that was completed as a part of the preliminary subdivision plan that was done for the Midtown Exchange project previously. The site has a lower walk score than average, but it is a higher transit score, higher bike score, a lower transportation cost overall than the average for the city. And then there is a much higher job proximity than the citywide average for this site. The nearest bus stops are about like 0.3, less than half a mile away along Wake Forest Road, and that's Route 2 and Route 24L. The request does add to the housing supply. It does allow for an increased residential entitlement. It permits a variety of housing types, smaller units, which does help to combat affordability issues, but it does not include any guaranteed subsidized units. And then I do want to point out that housing costs in this area are increasing faster than the rest of the city. Also, want to point out the area has more residents of color than the citywide average, more residents with less than a high school education than the citywide average, and it does have less low-income earners than the citywide average. The future land use designation for the property is regional mixed use and public parks and open space. And the requested zoning is consistent with these designations. The regional mixed use designation does recommend pretty explicitly the commercial mixed use zoning district. There are a lot of different recommendations on the urban form map for this particular site. It's in a frequent transit area and a city growth center. It's along a transit emphasis corridor, which is St. Albans Drive, and also along an urban thoroughfare, Benson Drive. So taken together, and in concert with, the conditions that the applicant has provided, the frontage that they have included in the request along St. Albans Drive. It does have an overall kind of hybrid approach to frontage, which would be consistent with all of these recommendations on the urban form map. So overall, staff found that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, with the future land use map, and with the urban form map. There are several consistent policies. This area is within the Midtown special area plan, special area guidance. So there is consistency with the land use and transitions policy within that particular special area guidance section. And then reducing vehicle miles through mixed use, reinforcing the urban pattern, and managing commercial development impacts through those conditions, and the height step downs that they have included and different kind of frontage requirements help to improve consistency with that policy. There are a couple of inconsistent policies. First is zoning and infrastructure impacts. This was highlighted because there are existing kind of fire service concerns in this area. The closest fire station to the site does not have an aerial ladder truck, and so the high-rise development that is happening on the site with the 20 stories, there is concerns being able to serve that high-rise development without having an aerial ladder truck close enough to be able to get to the site within the standard amount of time. Of course, this is an existing issue, right? Like the height is already approved in this area. They're not increasing the height at all. But of course, you are increasing the entitlement for residential units or non-residential units. So just something to bring up and highlight there. I think this was also part of the discussion for the North Hills rezoning that happened recently, so you might be familiar with having that discussion then. And then the frontage policy was highlighted, and that's just because on the next slide, I can highlight some outstanding issues. These are just really kind of clarity issues with these conditions. Condition number 2, with restricting the entrance on the primary street. I think there just needs to be some clarifying there, some clarifying the language to make sure that is not being less restrictive than the frontage requirement of the parking limited frontage, which does require pedestrian entrance on a primary street. And then condition number 12, it states an average of 10 feet for the Quail Hollow Drive site. Staff wanted to see that a little bit more specific, to be like a minimum and maximum, or a minimum. All right, that concludes my presentation. Before I wrap up, I do want to mention this particular presentation was not included in the board docs item. On Friday, that was pointed out, and so that was corrected. And so this presentation has been in the board docs item since Friday, but if you saw it before Friday, you might have seen the wrong presentation. I also want to point out there was one comment that was made on the public input, public engagement portal. That didn't make it into the staff report, but it is in your engagement report attachment with your backup attachments. That comment was just a question asking if the project had included any affordable housing conditions or anything like that. And the answer is no, it doesn't. All right, so your upcoming meetings are going to be August 8th and August 22nd. Do you have any questions for me before I ask the applicant to come up?
No, thank you. Thank you for that. We'll now turn to the applicant and those in favor for a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant, DeWitt Carolinas, the master developer of the Exchange Raleigh project. I will touch on the details of our request, but since it's been about 7 years since we've been in front of, since our last rezoning back in 2016, did just want to kind of provide an update to the commission. This is one of the latest renderings of the overall Exchange Raleigh development. This building here, 1000 Social, the office building, that is actually getting topped out today. And And again, this building here is already existing, but this kind of shows, the future extension of Quail Hollow, and also something that really wasn't anticipated during the rezoning is kind of this interior 4-acre park. Again, here's kind of the first phase of 1,000 Social here. This is kind of just a view of the planned interior park, again, totaling 4 acres, running really kind of throughout the development east to west. And this will kind of highlight the reason for one of the changes to the conditions. Again, here's kind of that park that runs through the middle of the site there. Here is, just for orientation, here's St. Albans, Benson, so Wake Forest Road is off here to the east. This is that, again, Quail Hollow extension where there's the planned multimodal bridge over 440 to the south. So, wanting to touch directly on the 4 proposed changes. First, the removal of the prohibition on heliport as a permitted use. Want to highlight that, but just by removing this from that list of prohibited uses doesn't affect the fact that if the applicant does ultimately apply for a helipad, they would still have to go through the special use permit with the Board of Adjustment. The reason for this removal is to really put this project on the same footing as all other commercially zoned properties in the area, and I'll show a map here in a minute that highlights that. Number 2, again, removing the kind of setback requirement for the bar, nightclub, tavern, lounge use being located at least 300 feet from St. Albans. The intent all along was to keep kind of that noise and activity off of St. Albans and have it interior. That is still the intent, and that is why we've kind of come back with the condition that prohibits outdoor seating and that kind of primary public entrance for that type of use on St. Albans. It was just an issue of running into, there were places in the park and portions of building fronting the park that are within that 300 feet. And so it was never the intent to prohibit those uses on the interior kind of part of the development here. So if there was a kiosk in the park that only sold beer or only sold wine, that would be prohibited right now within 300 feet. But again, working with the CAC and the folks in the area, we are now proposing a condition that, again, gets to that same intent. Removal of the 20-foot building and parking setback along St. Albans. So right now, there's a 20-foot setback along the entire frontage here. Again, when that condition was added, there was not the anticipation of a 4-acre park in the middle of this site. Putting that park there has created some pinch points on some of the properties. And after going through our neighborhood meetings, CAC meetings, we have retained the 20-foot setback on this property, the westernmost property. That's the one that's closest to the neighborhood. We have kind of revised our condition. Instead of an average 10-foot setback, we are now just proposing a 10-foot setback along this kind of middle property here. And then on this easternmost, farthest away from the residential neighborhoods, we would just be going to kind of the regular UDO requirements, which most of the building types require at least a 5-foot setback. I do want to highlight that those setbacks are measured from the right-of-way, and we've got about 15 feet in a lot of areas between the back of curb and our right-of-way line. So again, this buildings will have plenty of room to breathe, more so than kind of what your experience is to the west along St. Albans as you hit the North Hills East project. And then the last one is the conversion of the development intensity limit to overall square footage. And so I'll touch on that in just a moment. But here's the map wanted to show, and thank you, Bronwyn, for being able to update this one so quickly. But all of the area that's shaded in gray, that is where a helipad is allowed today with a special use permit. Again, that is all the property zoned, office mixed use, community mixed use, office park, industrial mixed use, and PD. The only districts where that's not allowed with a special use permit is your residential districts, R4, R6, R10, RX, and NX. So that's kind of the unshaded areas, is really just those residentially zoned areas. And so the purpose of this change is to really put this project on the same footing as all the other projects, all the other properties in the area. You saw kind of from those vision documents, we anticipate office users here. If there is, an economic development project or something where, and this site has competed on a number of economic development projects, if one of those tenants, potential users, is looking for the opportunity to have a helipad that serves that office use, again, we don't want to be at a disadvantage relative to all the other properties in the area. So touching on the trip limit. So back in 2015, 2016, when this property was first coming through the rezoning process, it was going on at the same time as the North Hills East expansion. It was important to the Midtown CAC that we not increase traffic than what was already allowed by the then current zoning. It was a mix of OX3, OX5, I think some CX7. So at the time, it was our intent to essentially limit intensity to what was allowed under that pre-2016 zoning. But at the time, transportation didn't want us to do a trip budget. They wanted us to do intensity caps. Well, as you might imagine, the intensity caps that we came up with at the time aren't necessarily reflective of what the market demand is, whether it's from residential, office, or other uses. And so we are now proposing a trip budget to allow for flexibility of uses, but these trips essentially tie back to the trip generation permitted under that pre-2016 zoning, which was also the same number of trips that were used in our traffic impact analysis in 2017 with the subdivision plan. So all of that to say, big picture, the intent all along has to not been able, to not increase the trip generation associated with these properties. And again, as you can see here, that's what we are doing. Again, so happy to address any questions the commission may have. We've had 2 good neighborhood meetings. We also had the Midtown CAC meeting last night. Happy to, again, answer any questions the commission may have. I do want to touch base on two of the staff comments. Again, there was a concern about the average 10-foot setback, about how to calculate that. Our proposal is to just remove the average language and just say 10-foot minimum setback. And then with regard to the frontage condition, again, we're saying that this bar use can't have a public entrance on St. Albans. It's our view that that's not less, we're not trying to change the parking limited frontage requirements for that each building has at least one entrance facing the public right of way. We don't think that this is less restrictive. If there's some language we need to add in there that says, this is not intended to be less restricted, we're happy to do that. But, if this were the only use in the building, then that just wouldn't be allowed. They would have to have another use that would have a public facing entrance in St. Albans. So again, not our intent to be less restrictive here. So appreciate your time, and again, here to address any questions.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public here who would like to speak in favor of this project? And with that, we'll move to those in opposition. Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak in opposition on this project? If so, you have a total of 10 minutes. Seeing none, I will bring it back to the table. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Yes.
A couple quick comments. I think this is generally a very reasonable request. I was part of the CAC committee that for Midtown that helped develop this. We gave it a full recommendation, I believe, a unanimous recommendation from the CAC for the original rezoning, and I've spoken to some of the folks in the CAC still, and Larry Halfont, current chair, is very satisfied with the request. I would like staff to, I'm not quite certain what the issue is with condition number 2. Could you clarify just for a little bit what the concern is, please?
I think the concern, like Michael was just saying, is if the bar, tavern, nightclub ends up being the only use in that building, then it's prohibiting having a pedestrian entrance facing the primary street. And so in that specific case, it may end up being going against the intent of that parking limited frontage. But I think adding some language, this isn't intended to be less restrictive, or just adding a little bit of clarification there might help solidify that.
Thank you. In the scenario you described, in that case, the condition would take precedence over the existing frontage regulations. Which regulation would trump there?
I think in that scenario, if there's a zoning condition, the zoning condition would. I might ask for, clarification on that from David York.
Did y'all hear the question? Okay. So there's a scenario conceived under which if the building is only one of the prohibited uses on the ground floor, the frontage would require a entrance, but the condition says you can't, and the condition would rule.
That's a conflict. That's why we would like for them to revise the condition. Yeah. I appreciate, I heard Mr. Birch say during part of his presentation something about like that's not the intent. That's not the intent. Well, zoning lasts a long time, longer than intents, and I think we're all just trying to create a situation where multiple iterations of reuse can happen without rezoning. Right? So it's clear about what's going on. They have some flexibility.
Thank you. Anybody else remember the helipad that used to be right there at North Hills, sitting on top of the bank?
Yeah.
On Six Forks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grew up with a helipad right there, so didn't seem to do me much harm.
Mr. Birch, give me a ride on that helicopter on the first time. I also have
I don't do helicopter rides.
I also have concern about the frontage, and if I remember correctly, when Highwoods came forward on the rezoning over here in downtown on Hargett Street, Mr. Hill was presenting, and we had a similar concern about not putting access on Hargett Street, and somehow we came up with a condition that we approved. I'm pretty sure I'm accurate in that, but I didn't take my Prevagen this morning, so I could be wrong.
Yeah. And Mr. O'Haver, Mr. Hotwell, so, we kind of operate under the rule that we can't have any conditions be less restrictive than the code. So when we have a condition like this, we're operating under the general rule that we still have to comply with the parking limited frontage standards. And so that dictates what uses can be within a building and what entrances there are. If there was a building where the only user, let's say there was one user, well, that one user then couldn't be a bar, nightclub, tavern, lounge. It would have to be another user, or there would have to be another tenant there that had its own entrance. I don't necessarily want to wordsmith a condition here, but what I think what we're willing to do is add language into the current condition, if this could be a technical kind of clarification that says something along the lines that it still must comply with the parking limited standards. Again, does
that work for you, Mr. York?
Other questions and comments from the table? So
That can be a technical change, or do we have to defer it?
there are two changes to be made. One of them is to clarify that condition 2 will not be less restrictive, and number 2, he wants to remove the average language.
Well,
Are those technical changes that can be made?
so the two changes would be, one, removing average.
Right, the word average,
Right.
yeah.
From the setback. And then the other would be on this condition 2 that essentially says, but this shall not,
Be less restrictive than the
right, be less.
EDO
Yeah.
requirements.
As I recall, we did not receive signatures on this version of conditions until Monday, which was after the deadline. Am I confusing this with the Case Brown one?
Yeah, we've had signed, these conditions are the same. The only, and the cities had signed conditions of these. The only 2 changes would be the revision to the average and then this condition 2.
Right.
But we've had
But
signed.
but the unsigned conditions you offered last week have other changes than the 2 you're talking about today?
No, the only change that one actually showed was just the removal of the word average.
I see.
We voted through without.
So, yeah, so that's the question for staff. If they make those 2 changes, are those technical changes that can be made with staff, or do we need to bring it back to the table?
We had a conversation. Staff had a conversation with the zoning administrator whose job it is to interpret the UDO. And at the time we had the meeting, we hadn't seen proposed language on how it would change. And so what we were considering would change an average of 15 feet to an average of 15 feet and then setting a minimum and a maximum. That's sort of the scenario we considered. And I believe under that scenario, it was, felt like that was a substantive change because you were establishing a minimum that could be closer than 15 feet, maximum that could be further than 15 feet. And once you establish those, that it, could change the position of, I think we did not consider changing average to minimum. Okay. And so,
Might be safer just to bring it back to the table with those 2 changes.
And just to clarify, it's been 10 feet the whole time. I know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
10 feet,
yeah.
Sorry, not 15 feet. And so we just didn't, that's not what we looked at when we were discussing it last week.
If it's safer to defer to August 8th, I think that won't change its hearing in front of City Council meaningfully.
Well, it's anticipated, I don't know whether, because the audience is empty of opponents, whether that's going to impact when staff is recommending the public hearing.
I see.
Okay, and so because of the size and scope of the case, and if there was a lot of opposition, say because of the heliport issue and proximity to the residents, this may be a first Tuesday of the month public hearing because that's in the evening when more people can attend than an afternoon. I don't know where planning staff would be in deciding, so I don't know what impact a delay here or a delay at council would be.
So maybe that was a red herring. Do we need to bring it back, or we don't think so, or maybe it's safer, might as well?
You don't have to bring it back.
Okay.
They have 2 options. One, we can circle back around with them and determine whether or not we think it can be handled under the just technical change and not a non-substantive change. And if we can gain agreement on that with the language they propose, then council could set the public hearing on the 5th, provided they got those conditions in the timeline provided.
But if you're not prepared to make that determination today, then
If we're
maybe we
not,
shouldn't vote on
then
it.
What they could do is ask the council to wait before they set the public hearing.
And change it prior to that.
And change it. And then
I would like to wait. I think we should do a little bit more work here until we're 100% certain before we make a recommendation. Because I feel like.
Any objection from that?
Well, so here's my thought. I respect your comment there. I guess the question is, right? It's like a technical process question.
I get that.
Right? From a, can council schedule the public hearing at the July 5th meeting, right? And that's a matter, whether they can do that is whether we can submit signed conditions. It's not really a matter of can Planning Commission make a recommendation based on those things, right?
Right.
I guess what we're asking Planning Commission to make a recommendation on is, yes, what's in front of you, knowing that we are going to be making the change in the clarification in condition 2, and then the change from an average to just a minimum setback
Right.
in the other condition.
Planning Commission can make a recommendation.
Right.
to that.
Yeah.
Right, based on the conditions that are in the case.
So we're just gonna make a decision based off.
We can make a decision on how
Sorry,
it's
sorry,
drafted
Today's my
today.
first day, so I'm gonna sit back.
Sure. We can make a decision based on how it's drafted today. We can also add a recommendation that council and the applicant make the 2 technical changes to the outstanding issues. We can add that as part of the motion to approve today.
Satisfaction of planning staff?
Yes. And if not, they'll address it in public hearing at the council level as well. What say ye? Would anyone then I'd like to entertain a motion?
If Mr. York and Ms. Walter are comfortable with that, I'm okay to move forward to recommend approval. I wrote down some language, so if I get it wrong at the end, I'm happy to accept a friendly amendment. But I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated June 27, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment case TCZ 1623, with the understanding that staff and attorney's office will work with the applicant and be in agreement with the 2 technical changes discussed during this meeting.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is that?
He said that's fine, which he didn't seem too happy about it, but I guess it passed it muster.
It was the 2 issues raised in the staff's presentation, and they're the only 2 changes we've discussed, so I think that's accurate.
Well, and they're listed as, in the staff report as outstanding issues. Yep. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any further discussion or debate on the merits of that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed?
I'm sustained.
We learned today that you have to
You have to vote
Vote.
one way or the other.
No.
Okay. That motion passes 6-1. And with some additional background, that frequently applicants, or occasionally applicants have asked to make additional recommendations for changes before it goes to council without planning commission seeing them first. And I would say 19 times out of 20, the staff says they're not comfortable with that, or just generally the process is better to keep it at the table instead and see those changes made here. This is sort of like the 1 out of 20 where I've seen staff say, yeah, we're comfortable with it. So that was
Well, it
my
seems
thoughts
that they're more technical in nature than.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's why I'm personally comfortable doing that.
Yes.
That was just one of those things I just wasn't very comfortable with. Just wasn't a lot of clarity around it.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Moving on to approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes from 2 committee meetings and 1 planning commission meeting. Do we have any discussion or comments on any of those minutes?
I wanted to note on the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee minutes that we had inadvertently misspelled Chris Bass's name. His first name is actually Chris, K-R-I-S. And also that Wayne Miles, Stormwater Program Manager, was present at that meeting, and also to note a corrected title for Sally Hoyt of Stormwater Supervisor. Chinitha is aware of those changes. I think she's actually already made them, but wanted to just flag those for you so that they would be included in your action today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items? Then with that, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Move to approve the minutes.
With those, do we need to approve those technical changes? Okay.
Move to approve the minutes with the noted changes.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Bennett, second. All those in favor by show of hands. Any opposed? That passes 7-0. Moving on to committee reports, or to other business, excuse me. First item is report of the chair. I am serving as chair today, but today is technically Roberta Fox's final meeting as the chair, and so I wanted to just recognize that, and even though she's not here, just thank her once again for her incredible service. She will be sorely missed from all of us. No, not the least of which is myself, as I serve as chair. Next, moving on to report of the members. As vice chair of the commission and chair of the committee of the whole, we have a special committee of the whole meeting in 2 days, this Thursday. That committee of the whole meeting will be to discuss the New Bern Avenue area plan and associated rezoning cases and comp plan amendments. That will be held at the convention center. We had previously discussed holding it in these chambers, but it turns out that this room is not available. So that will be moved. Just want to make sure everyone knows that's at the convention center, and staff may have additional information about parking and that kind of thing.
Right, so the agenda we published last week included directions to the meeting location and information about parking. You can park, the public can park for free, commissioners can park for free in the deck south of the convention center on, I believe it's level 2, and we will be in room 304. RTN will be with us to broadcast. So it'll be just like being here. Parking will be free and will be broadcast. We'll just be in a different room with different carpet. And there's also good transit access to that site as well. So really pleased that we could make a relocation that would not inconvenience the public.
Thank you. And before I move on, just want to remind everyone, we have a new parking system, so please bring your parking tickets in with you from the municipal deck. And there's an iPad right outside of these double doors on this floor, immediately to your left, where you can scan those and get out of the parking deck for free. Moving on.
Chair Miller, for the meeting on Thursday, are we anticipating extending the time?
Yes. That was not in the agenda, correct. We have discussed holding the traditionally meetings go from 4 to 6. We've discussed holding it until at least 4:30, until at least 6:30.
4:30, huh?
Yeah. That's the current proposal that we have received confirmation. We have a quorum there. Any further discussion on the timing allotted or proposed? Okay. Then, good clarification. This Thursday from 4 to 6:30 at the convention center. Okay, moving on to Commissioner Raines.
I don't have anything to report this time.
Thank you. Just acknowledging appreciation for Chair Fox and welcoming Commissioner McCrimmon.
Thank you. No report.
I've sent emails, but unfortunately, I will be out of town for the Committee of Whole, but I'm glad RTN will be there because I'll be watching.
No major comments. Again, Strategic Planning Committee voted out a recommendation today, or we voted on a recommendation today. Thank you all for the participation on the Strategic Plan Committee, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for my first commission meeting. It was fun.
Thanks, everyone. Moving on to report of the Assistant Director.
I also stand in awe of Chair Fox's service.
Yes.
And glad she will stay on the commission a little bit longer. I'm very excited, Commissioner McCrimmon, that you're here today. Welcome. And I don't have anything to add beyond that. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I guess this is the last meeting of the full Planning Commission before summer. So I'll see you Thursday, and then also have a great summer. And I'll be reaching out to everyone in addition to talk about committee assignments for next year as well. Thanks very much. With that, we are adjourned.